Most people believe a healthcare system fails all at once, but that's not how it actually happens. It doesn't collapse overnight. It breaks, slowly, and the people who live through it learn things that most others never have to think about. At first, everything still looks normal. Hospitals are open. Doctors are still working. Pharmacies are still stocked. But something feels off. Small delays start to appear. Appointments take longer. Basic medications become harder to find. Equipment isn't always available when needed. Nothing critical. Not yet. So most people ignore it. They assume it's temporary. But over time, those small gaps start connecting. And that's when the real shift begins. Because healthcare doesn't fail when services stop. It fails when reliability disappears. When you can't predict whether help will be there. Every decision becomes more complicated. That's the first lesson people learn. Access is not the same as availability. Just because a hospital exists, doesn't mean it can help you when you need it. And that changes behavior. At first, people try to adapt the same way they always have. They wait. They delay. They assume things will improve. But the results start to feel inconsistent. A condition that should be simple, isn't treated in time. A prescription that should be routine, isn't filled. And the outcome doesn't match the expectation. That's when frustration turns into awareness. Because people begin to realize something deeper is happening. The system they depend on isn't stable anymore. And that leads to the second lesson. Timing becomes everything. In a stable system, delays are inconvenient. In an unstable one, delays are dangerous. A few extra hours can matter. A few extra days can change the outcome completely. So people stop thinking in terms of convenience and start thinking in terms of urgency, not panic, but awareness of how fast situations can escalate. And that leads to another shift. People begin to take earlier action. They don't wait for symptoms to become severe. They don't assume they'll have time later. Because they've seen what happens when later doesn't exist. And that's where the third lesson comes in. Small problems are no longer small. In a functioning system, minor issues are handled quickly. In a failing one, they compound. A small cut becomes infected. A mild condition becomes chronic. A manageable issue becomes critical. Not because it's more dangerous, but because it's not addressed in time. And that forces people to adapt in ways they never had to before. They start relying less on the system, and more on their own ability to respond. But this is where most people misunderstand what happens next. It's not about becoming a doctor. It's about thinking differently. Because the real issue isn't the collapse itself. It's the gap it exposes. The real issue isn't the lack of care. It's the lack of understanding. The real issue isn't the emergency. It's how unprepared people are to interpret it. And that's the turning point. Because once people recognize that, they stop focusing only on solutions, and start focusing on structure. They begin to observe patterns. They learn which symptoms matter most. They learn how conditions evolve over time. They learn what can wait, and what cannot. And that changes how they respond. Instead of reacting emotionally, they evaluate. Instead of waiting passively, they act earlier. Instead of depending completely, they create alternatives. Not perfect ones, but enough to make a difference. And that's what defines the people who adapt. Not resources, not tools, but understanding. Because when the system becomes unreliable, clarity becomes more valuable than anything else. It doesn't remove risk. It doesn't guarantee outcomes. But it reduces uncertainty. And in unstable situations, that's what allows people to keep functioning. If you want a more structured breakdown of what people actually learn in these situations and how they apply it in real life, there's a practical guide linked in the description that goes deeper into this. You can also subscribe if you want more videos that break down complex realities like this in a clear and realistic way. Because when systems fail, what you understand becomes what you rely on.